Good evening, everyone, and welcome yet again to another session at the Digital Excellence Pharma Academy, which is a joint initiative of Medicine Man along with CredoWeb. And the goal is to equip Indian pharma professionals with the knowledge and the insights that they need to adapt digital marketing in the days ahead. Today, we have a very special guest, Samish Menon Tekil, who is the Global Access Director for Takeda and is based out of Massachusetts in the United States. And he will be joining us all the way from the US to take this session for you, which only shows his commitment to the Indian pharma professionals and their development. And he will be talking on a very important subject of how actually we go about adopting digital marketing based on the insights and the experience that he had while doing several pilots and projects in digital marketing through the course of his career. So thank you very much, Samish, for taking your time out. And I would encourage all our pharma friends to tell their colleagues about this program, and they can join it for free of cost because CredoWeb is sponsoring this program. And if any time you feel like doing a pilot or a full-fledged project in digital marketing, do get in touch with us. Just uh, make a comment in the discussion box and our team will get in touch with you. And I also want to say that on Friday at 5 o'clock, we will be having a question and answer session with Samish. So do post your questions, however complex you think they are, and Samish will be answering those questions. So every Wednesday, 5 o'clock, and every Friday at 5 o'clock, do tune in to Digital Excellence Pharma Academy, a joint initiative by Medicine Man and CredWeb. Over to you, Samish, for a wonderful session. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, everyone. I'm Samish Tekil. It's my pleasure to be with you today in this platform, as well as share some of my learnings from and concepts from some of our key projects and key pilots, what we did in European markets in my earlier organizations. Thank you, and it's my pleasure to be here again. And before starting, I would like to also thank Mr. Anup Sowans and Mr. Deep Bhandari to give me this fantastic opportunity to be a part of this, as well as share my thoughts with all of you. And it's a great stuff what they are doing to the industry, wherein we use this particular time in a virtual platform to share our understanding, share our thoughts, and congratulations for this great initiative. And I think we should begin to the section of what we want to talk today. So the topic today is, what are some of the winning concepts which we learned in while we did some of the multi-channel marketing campaigns, some of the pilot campaigns connected to probably the digital launches, or even launch of a brand in a European market. So I'm not using one pilot, but predominantly one pilot study, but still taking some of the learnings from various kinds of projects, what we did in European markets, to come out with around 4 concepts, which I think would be critical enough or useful in any particular setup of marketing or market scenarios. So jumping into the agenda today, what we can look for is, the first thing I will give you is a brief on what is the pilot, what I'm talking about, what is the project that we did, what was the background for that. So you will get some understanding from where we are coming to when we talk about this winning concept, which is connected to how we choose a customer set when we plan a campaign, a digital campaign, how we plan, what is the ideal content to be delivered, or the set of contents, what is the objective of providing a set of contents. And then once we know the customer and the content, how do we choose the channel, which is very important and very critical, because we just can't go across all channels to the entire customer set, right? And then finally, how important, or rather how critical, professionals like you and me need to start thinking about how we can create a more customer-centric organization so that we are not talking just products, but we are talking about how a customer thinks and how we want the customer to be thinking. So getting into, let's start with what's the pilot which I was talking about. In one of my early organizations, we did a pilot to do a multi-channel campaign in two countries in Europe, Spain and Germany. The background for that was we already had a product indicated for a particular disease in the pediatric segment, and we got an additional indication of the same disease in an adult population, and we wanted to take it forward or launch the product to the adult segment of the same indication. So we wanted to do some market awareness campaigns. We want the physicians to start looking at the adult segment of this one. So the target audience was neurologists and psychiatrists in these two markets. I've written further segmented. Of course, we will get into that. The period, what we did was about 6 months to know how we need to select, how we need to provide the content, and see how the physicians respond to the campaign. And the key objectives of why we were doing this campaign, as I mentioned earlier, this was a launch to a new indication. So the objectives were to increase the disease awareness as well as get the physician to diagnose the disease in adult segment. And as well as once they diagnose it, we also wanted some physicians to do a first-hand trial by the brand on the right patient. So when I say trial, it's not a clinical trial, but give to some of the patients so that they know firsthand how the product works or what are the things which they need to look for when they diagnose and treat a patient and how the patient respond. So you got a feeling why we did the project, our pilot, and what are the key things which we wanted to achieve out of that. So it gives you a perspective from where we will be taking forward or we'll be going forward in terms of the concepts which I will be sharing with you. Getting to the next part of the agenda is the winning concepts. For example, as I mentioned earlier, we will touch upon how we should look at segmenting the customers. We are buttoning up not the entire neurologist and psychiatrist to countries, but how do we focus them down so that our approach is very clear to a particular set of customers, and then how we figure out the content, channel, and the customer-centric organizations. Let's take the top three ones first, the customer, content, and channel, and then we will figure out how to move to the next one. So when we break it up, how we want to go forward, the concepts. The first one is, how do we plan to segment the customer set based on their behaviors or attitudes? So the behaviors and attitudes will decide how you can segment your customer set. And adoption ladder is a tool which we can use to do this, which I will go through in the next slides. So once we know this is our particular target segment based on the behaviors and attitudes, then we know what is the kind of behavioral shift we want these customers to move from. Again, all this will be clear in the subsequent slides. So once we know, okay, the behavioral shift, what we want for the customers is A to B, then it's easier to know what content would aid that behavioral shift. So you're first identifying the customer segment based on their behaviors and attitudes. Then you're understanding what kind of change in their behaviors and attitudes you want. That's a behavioral shift. And then identify content that will help the physicians to have this behavioral shift. Once you understand both, then it is time to choose the right channels based on what kind of reach the customers would have to these particular channels we use, what kind of impact they would create, as well as what kind of need you have. So if we are just not going to 50 channels in front of us, we are just not going to repeat the frequency as the budget allows us. We are in the others, on contrary, we are going according to what we need so that the investment is much more productive and measured over there. Let's get into one by one. What's an adoption ladder? So an adoption ladder is a tool, as I mentioned earlier, which we advocate our sales reps to do every 6 months or at least once in a year. So if, for example, if I'm a sales rep in the market, I have around, say, 150 or 200 customers in the list. So I will bucket them according to their behaviors and attitudes. And on the middle of the slide, you will see 6 buckets, which is from unaware to advocate. For example, if I know customer A is unaware of the disease which I'm talking about, whatever it is, and he's also unaware about the brand which I'm talking about or my product, then I segment that particular customer in unaware. So aware is somebody who's aware of both the disease and the brand. Trialist is someone who's aware. At the same time, he has or she has trialed some of the physical patients. He has tried your product, but still she's prescribing competitor brands. A user is somebody who is using on a regular basis your product, but actually he or she uses competitors' brands as well. Of course, a loyal is somebody who's more loyal to you, who may be giving you the maximum share for that particular disease segment in terms of your brand or brands, the portfolio. And of course, advocate is somebody who is not only supporting you well, but he's also somebody who is good enough or strong enough, influential enough to stand up and talk about your product or your company in front of other stakeholders, maybe patient advocates, KOLs, payers, whoever. So this is how we can segment your customers based on their behaviors and attitudes. So what do we need to do here? The sales reps need to understand. Sales reps need to ask these questions to the physicians, and on an ongoing basis, the reps need to know how his behavior is changing so that how my customers are moving from one bucket to the next. And we want the physicians to go up the ladder, right? We don't want everyone to be unaware or aware throughout. So we want them to be moving. Based on each of these ladder positions, we need to decide what content will help them to move up. So regarding the pilot which I mentioned, we've in fact used these 3 segments to target. Because, as I mentioned earlier, we were talking about a brand which is getting into a new indication or a new patient segment. So we wanted the physicians to be, first of all, aware, and then we want them to diagnose. Once diagnosed, we want them to try the brand. So it fits in. If that is your objective, you need to be clear the customers whom we are going to target is aligned to that objective, and we can move them up the ladder as we go. So coming back to the concept, when you roll out a campaign, or when you roll out a digital marketing campaign, always it is good to connect or rather align your customer segment based on the strategic objectives you have. So based on their behaviors and attitudes, you are selecting them, and then based on what you want to achieve, you have your strategic objectives set. Okay. From here, once we know these are the customer segments who we are going to target, we know what are their current behaviors. For example, we want an unaware customer after 3 months or 6 months or 1 year. We want them to move into aware, right? So for that, we identify the right content. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you will see a list of topics. This is just an example slide. So we have a list of topics or content over there, and then we are trying to map them to the right segment so that we know this is the content which will help. For example, prevalence of the disease X, or the potential impact of disease X in terms of patients or society is something which will help, which might help an unaware customer to understand about the disease and become an aware customer pertaining to disease. Similarly, you want to talk to them about or share the content about the product to make them aware of the product, if that is the case. So it's about identifying the correct segment and then identifying what is the behavioral shift you want, and then trying to figure out what content would content would exactly aid them to get that behavioral shift happen. So once we do these two, which are like straightforward, I would say, because it's all from an internal data point. You have your customer set, you have your content which could be mapped. Now the third one comes up, like which channels I should use so that my content will reach the customers at the right manner or the right frequency, the proper manner in which I want. So when we did the project pilot, when we looked around at this stage, easily there were like more than 50 channels out there. Could be like old channels, like for example, is an old channel. So it's a fantastic channel which most companies have on their own. There could be paid channels like a conference booth, like a internet conference where you are going, or even online ad. These are all paid, where you need to pay, but you will get an exposure for your brand or for your reports or scientific papers, whatever. At the same time, there are some earned channels where your prior engagement leaves something, a remark for you, which is something you earn, probably a KOL talking about your company or your brand to another set of customers without you being pro. So that is something like an earned channel. So you have these different kind of channels, which is fine, but how do you choose them? Should we go with all the 50? I doubt whether, because I don't think any company would have that kind of bottomless pockets nowadays. So you need to figure out which channels would suit my target segment so that I'm spending the money in the right manner. How do we do this? So we went out to our customers, whom I mentioned earlier to you, how we segmented, and asked two questions. Simple. Which channels out of these you have encountered in the past 3 months? That shows what kind of reach these customers have, these channels have in your particular specific customer segment. And the next question is, to what extent these channels influence your treatment decisions? So one is, how often they see these. Second, you get to know what kind of impact it has in managing or making their treatment decisions or prescription decisions. When we did this, we got a plot something like this, where on the x-axis you will see the impact, each of the channels, which you can see here as dots and various colors, because we divided them to owned or paid or earned. But for now, we can leave it out. But if you look into different channels, the y-axis shows what kind of a reach the physicians had on an average in the two markets I mentioned earlier. For example, a rep, 2/3 or 65-66% of the sales reps for the physicians were saying, we encountered a rep in the last 3 months. Even at least 2 out of 3 physicians are seeing a rep in the last 3 months, which is fine. At the same time, on the x-axis, they're saying in a scale of 1 to 10, what kind of an impact these channels have in deciding the treatment options or in taking a treatment decision or a prescription decision. So they gave 10 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. They gave their measures. We took the outliers out, and then you can see here a rep has got something like a number 5.5, and you have others. At the same time, KOL is somewhere here. KOL is like they're saying a KOL when he talks to us. If they have got they create an impact of something like 7.9 against a rep of 5.5. Does it make real sense? It's not very easy to compare. So what we did a small recalibration to make the x-axis. We took the reps number as a base. So I'll explain it to you once again. In order for us to compare the impact of different channels against a rep's impact, we did the x-axis. We recalibrated the rep as a base, which the rep's impact becomes 1, and all the other, you can see, for example, a medical scientific liaison has got 1.5. A KOL has got 2.5. So which means, when you use other channels relative to a rep, how good is their impact or how bad is their impact? For example, on the left hand side, you have banner ads, which has got a lower impact for sure. We know if you see just a brand name or some catchy copyright on a banner, it would have a very limited treatment influential power than a sales rep, of course. At the same time, a KOL could be more because he's more credible than a promotional sales rep talking about a product, right? So why we wanted rep as a base? Because you and me, everyone, most of us, rep is the channel which we know the maximum, or the most understood channel is a sales rep. I was also a sales rep years back. So we know how a sales rep work, how a physician looks into a sales rep, what are the challenges over there. So we wanted to base our analysis or evaluation of different channels to a sales rep's impact. So, for example, now, when you look into another example, scientific website on the top left, top right, from this graph, we know physicians in Germany and Spain, the segment whom we worked on, says that at least around 60% of them get into a third-party scientific website in 3 months, which is a very good reach, and they have a treatment impact, or they have an impact in their decision making, somewhere around 1.8, or rather roughly 2. So that is something like roughly twice an impact a rep could create a third-party scientific website can. So again, provided you are having the right content in the scientific website. So there are many caveats to that, but this is a research what we did to get a qualitative understanding how each of these channels would lay out in terms of reach and impact, so that we know from a qualitative point which are those channels which we can look for in these two markets for that particular customer segment. So two things which I want to highlight again is, it's not that this is a Bible for any physician segment, any market. No, this is something every marketer should be doing for his own market with his own customer segment, because this could be completely different. And when you especially look at India, where we have so much of a heterogeneous infrastructure mix, or even behavioral mix across physicians, when you do this survey in a metropolitan city, and when you do a survey in a tier 3 or tier 4 city, it may be completely different, the way they have reached towards some of the channels and impact. So we might have to understand where we want to work on, and then have to do these kind of small researches. It wouldn't cost much. This is just telecall asking 2 questions. So if you do that, this gives you a good feel from a qualitative point, which are those high-level channels which we could use. The second point is, it's not always straightforward. Okay, you have such a graph, go for the right top corner, that is the colleague or online medical journal or scientific. No, of course, they are the good ones in terms of reach and impact, but we also need to look what is the content which you want to convey. If you don't have much new scientific stuff to talk, there is not much what we can do with a online medical journal, because a Lancet is not going to publish some very low-key kind of a scientific paper, right? So if we don't have, then we don't need to look at that. At the same time, if we want to club something too, or rather, these on the right and top corner, you will have a particular investment to do that. And there will be something on the left-hand side, for example, a banner ad down here, or a journal ad on the top, which you see in between 40 and 50% on the left-hand side. You might use that plus a scientific website, because an ad wouldn't have much of an impact, but it might be very easy, effortless to create a journal ad or a banner ad, for example. Only thing, you need a good creative line, because you only get that much space on top of a website. If you use that, it's very easy to create. If you use that, a catchy phrase or a hook can in fact drive customers from a banner ad to a high impact ad like a scientific website pretty much easy, so that you're using two things to get your customers to a high impact channel. So the two things what I told was, it's always good to do this research with your physicians in your market, because it might change, but it will give you a qualitative understanding what are those channels which has got the high reach and impact. Second one is, it's not always straightforward that you take the top right corner channels, but you can always mix and match depending on what content you have and what you want to achieve with your customers. So from here, the last concept, I didn't talk about multi-channel unit. So I told you the reps impact is taken as a base of 1, and that we like to call is one multi-channel unit. So whatever impact a rep can create with the physicians in one call, in one sales call, that is what we are taking as one multi-channel unit. Why do we want to do that? I'll tell you in the next slide. So before going that, once again, I'm saying this research would tell you what is a qualitative form of identifying the key channels in your market and where each of the channels stands from a multi-channel unit point of view. Okay, now to the next slide. When we plan for a cycle or a next sales cycle, ideally, the sales rep should be doing an analysis in terms of, okay, I have got 3 segments or 4 segments of customers in my territory. My segment 1, I'm just throwing a number, has got 50 patients, okay, 50 physicians, and each of those physicians, the required share of voice is something like 10 MCUs, or rather, I need to meet them 10 times in the sales quarter, so that I know the objective, what I want from segment 1, I will mostly get. It's not, again, very precise, but that's how you plan your sales cycle. I know the 10 guys or the 50 guys, the top guys, I need to meet them 10 times. And the next segment, okay, I need to meet them something like 8 times. But at the same time, that's what the SO, the share of voice requirement in terms of MCUs. Then they know the plan for me for the coming quarter, even though I know my segment 1 needs to be met 10 times, or rather they need 10 MCUs, I'll be able to meet them probably 8 times. Why? My own admin stuff, or I'm going on vacation, my physicians are going on vacation, there are some conferences happening. So I think realistically, I'll be able to meet them the 8. So that leaves me with a gap of 2 MCUs, which I can supplement with multi-channel or omni-channel complements, or rather supplement it with other multiple channels. So what you're trying to do here, and when you aggregate it at a manager level or at a sales head level or a country level, I just threw some numbers here. For example, if segment 1 is like 1,000 customers in the country, and from the sales rep you collected, okay, roughly the country, the segment 1, we need to meet something like 10 times, 10 MCUs. Realistically, we are able to do only 8 for whatever reason. So we have a gap to be filled for 2 MCUs for the next quarter or for the next cycle. Then, from a head office point of view, they know that we need 2 more MCUs for the first segment. They go back to my earlier slide and see which are the channels which are good for me, ideal for me to deliver this 2 MCUs. For example, I can, if it is segment 1, if I know, okay, the KOLs, I've got these KOLs, I can have some KOL meetings, that I know can give an MCU of 2.5, which is good. I only want 2. I can deliver 2.5. I know from my earlier experience as well, KOL meetings are well accepted. So that could be one way. Or if I know, no, the KOLs I want to use for segment 2, for whatever reason, maybe the content is ideal for them, or segment 1 are all top guns, they might not like a peer coming and talking to me. You can try for as I told earlier, a banner ad plus a scientific website, which is like 0.5 plus something like 1.8 gives you again roughly 2.3 MCUs. So here, the qualitative aspect which you got out of the research in this chart, you're trying to understand how your sales rep coverage in terms of MCUs are going to be for the cycle. And quantitatively, you're trying to plug in and you're trying to marry both this research to understand the qualitative approach and this under evaluation to know what quantitative requirements or need you have. So basically, the channel mix is based on the channel's reach, impact, which we saw on the earlier slide, and the segment's share of voice. So I hope you got that concept of how to get to make a evaluation or decision in terms of how to create the channel mix from these three variables. Now, let me go back to what we discussed. So we talked about these three concepts where how we can target or bring the focus in terms of the customer segments, in terms of their behaviors or attitudes, especially by using the tool of adoption ladder. Once we know that, we thought we discussed how we understand what behavioral change we require and what is the content which will help them to move from behavior A to behavior B. And once we know which customers and what are the content for them, how to choose the channel based on reach, impact, and share of voice need. Okay? There is one thread across these three concepts which is very much required for any organization to know. On the first one, we are talking about customers' behaviors. You need to know customers' behaviors. Second one is to know what they want to know or learn in terms of content. Again, it is customer understanding. And the third one is also again to know how customers react to these kind of channels and what kind of share of voice is required for each of those customer channels. Everything boils down to one thing: customer insights. How do we draw customers' insights? You can throw millions to create market research. That is one way. But we have something else which has exposure to customers day in and day out. These are sales reps. At the same time, for sales rep to act or sales rep to be more customer centric, you have to have a customer centric organization, because you cannot have just sales rep being customer centric and others all being like whatever other centric. It needs to have an organizational cultural focus to get every action is around the customer's understanding, customers' needs, customers' gaps, customers' behaviors. So how do we do this? How can we have customer insights being something which is like constantly being monitored, being reviewed, being sliced, diced to understand and plan our whole approach around that? How do we do? We need to have an organization which has got an approach tuned towards that. So when you take a step back, you again, whatever I'm going to tell now, it is not pinpointing to a company or any particular sales reps in the company. I was also a sales rep. When you look back, we know if tomorrow, I can tell from my side, tomorrow I'm going to be a sales rep in the field, I will be more tempted to do like call up a physician, take an appointment, show up in front of him or her, talk about a detail aid I have, talk about the product I have, request for the product, thank him for the support, and walk out. I'm tempted to do that because that's what I'm comfortable doing. That's what I've done when I was a sales rep. Do you think that is the right manner to continue when we are talking about approaches where we want to know what customers think and act? No. This kind of an approach is very straight, very one-sided. The physician need not, or most probably doesn't learn or earn much, or even take advantage of that. It's mostly one side with product-specific messages going from the sales rep to the physician. We need to change that. We need to change that approach to something which is two-way, where at end of a call or end of a second call, both the physician and the sales rep are benefiting from each of their expertise. How do we do that? Of course, it is to initiate a dialogue. Initiate a dialogue for what? Is it to know how the product is doing? Might not be. Initiate a dialogue because you are to better understand what the customer does, what the customer feels, what are his pain areas, what are his focuses, challenges. How do you seek to understand? How do you ask those questions? By getting high engagement questions. How is the product doing? That's not a high engagement question. You know, how's patients who are on our drug? That's not a high engagement. That is good. That's not a high engagement question. How do you treat patients who have got a resistance to move to insulins? Are they afraid of injections? How do you manage that? That's a high engagement question. How do you treat a patient who had an event of myocardial infarction and if he is like 60 plus and with multiple risk factors? That's a high engagement question. What are your top objectives when it comes to managing multiple leukemia or multiple myeloma? Sorry, that's a high engagement question. So our sales reps should be trained and made them realize what are those key questions I need to ask, what goes through physicians' minds, and what are their challenges. Because these kind of discussions, not in one call, maybe a series of calls, these are some things which will uncover the needs of the customers in front of us. And when you know what the customer's needs are, the answer might not be only your product, or a set of products. Answer could be your own product. Answer could be products from other franchises in your company. Answers could be from the relationships what the company has with other KOLs, with international KOLs. The answers could be the expertise from your R&D teams or expertise from your medical teams to go in front of them. So then the physician realizes the guy who is sitting in front of me is not a product provider. He is a solutions provider. He can try to get me solutions for multiple things. And of course, many of us who are on this webinar now would have had different experiences on how sometimes a sales rep would have created a huge benefit, sometimes even being disruptive. He might have stopped a prescription for his product, but his focus was on the solution providing approach, which would have given out huge advantage in their relationships as well as going forward. So when I'm talking about this, how to uncovering needs and how to get that, I don't think it is about a change. I should reword the title to creating a transformational change of our approach to customers. That's not easy. That's not easy. When we do transformational changes, the results are going to be transformational. The effort required is also going to be enormous. And that's why we are talking that in this webinar today. So what it needs is continuous coaching. Continuous coaching, again, I'm not talking about sales coaching. Continuous coaching across the organization, right? Because it's a culture which an organization has to showcase so that we can expect our sales as well as marketing colleagues to have that as a culture. Of course, the company as a team needs to identify why, what are the needs, creating and building an approach like that, frameworks to be done, how the teams can be handheld to take them forward in asking the right questions in different scenarios, how can we position each of those challenges with probable solutions inside the company, how informative they are, and how in between the teams we can motivate each other so that our sales reps and marketers are moving up the channel in terms of being more customer-centric, as well as create a trust and partnership, not only between employees of the organizations, but also between the company and the customer, where it becomes a trust-based partnership as a solutions being provided both ways. So coming back to my earlier slide, what we wanted to achieve today, we talked briefly about the pilot. Then we came from the learnings of the pilots. We shared what are the winning concepts identifying customer segments through adoption ladder, identifying the content according to what behavioral change we want, identifying the channels based on reach, impact, and share of voice requirement, and how required or how critical it is to create a customer-centric organization so that we learn more and more about the customers and their needs, which might be able to plug in or address with various expertise across the company. This is my last slide on the key takeaways. I think I already kind of touched upon these in the earlier slide. How you customize your segment based on behaviors, identify the right messages for the right segments to aid the desired behavioral shift, select the channel based on reach, impact, and share of voice requirement, and a transformational change in our approach to customers, how super critical it is, and how we can start shaping our organization to achieve. I would say this is a winning formula because in the pilots, what I have mentioned earlier, and in various other projects, these things have come out more and more again and again in our experience. And when we addressed some of these, we have seen this was really creating a successful outcome, which the organizations where I worked in could really build further on top of that. So thank you. These are my key takeaways. And thank you so much for giving your attention to the key concepts which I had to share with you. And once again, thank you so much. And also I thank Mr. Anup Soans.
Thank you, Samish. That was indeed a very insightful and a very detailed virtual masterclass in digital marketing. I'm sure that our participants have thoroughly enjoyed the session. However, if you have questions or queries, please do write them on the discussion page on this page, and Samish will answer them on 4th September, Friday at 5 o'clock. So do tune in for a question and answer session with Samish on the same topic on the 4th September at 5 p.m. So thank you all once again for joining us. Good evening and have a great day.